So I kind of like looked at this question of, well, what are you trying to achieve as a parent, from the angle of, well, what makes people unique compared to animals, compared to other creatures in the world, and, well, what makes us unique? Well, maybe that's exactly what we should be focusing on. And you can kind of tell me what you all think about it. But I kind of came up with four different things that make people unique. One is speech. No other creature speaks. The ability to create meaning from what we say, by what we say. The other is that we're highly social. Different researchers, E.O. Wilson, for example, he's a good example. Um, Demonstrates that we're eusocial. And what that basically means is, it's not just that we hang out with other people, but who we are on a fundamental level demands that we be in groups, and we work together, and we have different, levels of, not just levels of competency, but different interests, and we work together, and we create whole societies. We build whole societies. And that, even on a fundamental level, not just being with people in that sort of building of society sort of way, but we need other people just as much as we need food and air. It was kind of almost by accident. There was a lot of research coming out of Romania in the orphanages there. Romania went through this political upheaval, and I don't know what was going on there, that they got in their heads that they should just kind of like congregate all children into orphanages, take them away from their parents. It was not stuff. But what they ended up discovering is, when you have all these rows of kids, and they just started dying. They were feeding them, and they're warm, and they got their blanket, and they got their formula. But what was missing is that they weren't being touched. They weren't being held. That we need companionship. We need other people. We need that sort of intimacy and love, the same way that we need food. Otherwise, we just wither away. And you also see this with, say, solitary confinement. It doesn't take a couple days until you start. It doesn't take a couple days until you start going crazy in that sort of situation. Look, we need people. So, highly social. And we harness nature. That was another part of being human. I mean, like, we got opposable thumb, man. Like, we make tools and we create fire. The other thing, kind of chuckled at, it kind of just occurred to me the other day, and just kind of fit nicely in this idea of, figuring out what your target is that we throw. And you think about it for a second. Different creatures have different skills. Some can swim, some can fly. And they hunt differently. Some run really fast. We throw. That's how we hunt. That's what we hunted for. The early societies. We throw the spear. Even thinking in as far as language, how we talk. We throw parties. We throw ideas around, and even our kids throw tantrums. The word throw is like very fundamental in how we relate to things. Our eyesight is almost as good as most birds of prey, which is pretty abnormal for creatures that walk pretty slow. Well, why do you need such great eyesight? We look for targets. We take aim, and we throw the spear. We shoot the arrow. This is another idea. The idea of being over in a mitzvah, or in a positive or negative commandment. Being over is, well, it's passing. That's what the word means. You're missing the mark. You're passing the mark. It's kind of like an archery term. So even in the way that we look at religious life is based on taking aim and throwing. Every game that people like to play, all the moving games, whether it's you're kicking a ball, throwing a ball, I mean, you're throwing an object. We love projectiles. So it just fits so nicely. Like, that's what we do, and in order to hit the mark, in order to achieve our goals, well, what we do is we create a target. We look for what we want to hit. And it's that target, like I was saying before, that ultimately guides all of our actions. So kind of going back and looking at these unique characteristics that make people people, well, that's kind of interesting because, what does speech do? Well, what that basically is, engaging in speech is really engaging in meaning and purpose in life. That we're being, through language, being able to label our experiences, being able to understand ourselves, to understand our feelings, to understand our thoughts, to articulate them more finely. I mean, it's ultimately gaining knowledge, but more importantly, gaining wisdom. And by doing that, we're able to organize our internal life in such a way where we can become more resilient to the hardships and pains that go along with living. Language is important. How we create associations. I mean, I think it's kind of an interesting idea. The Ramban in his commentary on the Chumash gets a little bit into this as well. God created Tov Vohu, this initial substance of reality. Well, after he created that, well, what did he do? It's almost like he spoke to it, and through speaking, through creating and articulating speech, well, that's how God gave meaning and form to the world. Well, we do the same thing. What we call a thing determines what it is to us. That's a power that we have. As far as being social creatures, well, to be a successful social creature means that being emotionally stable enough so that you can form deep bonds with those around you, with friends, with family. And it's not just, that's not just that. That's important enough, but it's like being social, in order to have a job that's worth anything. And I don't mean worth anything valuable wise, but meaning wise, being able to figure out what you want to do, will you do things with people at work, and being able to have a stable marriage, to be able to raise one's own kids. It's almost like, being social is taking the power of speech, the power of discovering meaning and value, and being able to translate that into the world and be able to give that to others. It's worth kind of noting also, maybe even almost looking at, well, how we are as social beings, almost having two parts to it. Researchers kind of look at this as being either being in communion with society, or being in cooperation and going along with the flow, being a part of society constructively. And agency, being something different, as being an individual. And there is this paradox, this interplay of knowing when to go with the flow, but also knowing when to take a stand and express your views, express your opinions. And, well, being able to more clearly articulate meaning and being emotionally stable to give to society, well, those two kind of go together to help a person figure out, well, when should you be more communal and when should you be more of an individual? You need to be both, but it's a question of context, when. And the last, as far as harnessing nature, well, that's really just mastering danger. Fire is a tremendously destructive force. But it's by learning how to, and again, we'll get into this more with emotion coaching, but learning how to be resilient, learning how to integrate one's emotions and be resilient. Well, that's what enables us to face the dangers of life. And not just face them, but actually turn them into something which is useful. Harnessing fire into electricity, fundamentally. We're so resilient when it comes to fire. We don't give it a second thought when we see it because we've mastered it. And finally, this last idea of, well, again, being a good marksman is being able to help our kids. And this will be more of the behavioral aspect of things, of teaching them in their bones through practice, learning how to clarify what their values are. What are they living for? What direction do they want to go? But then figuring out specifically, well, what are the goals that they need to set, how to properly set goals, not too much, not taking on the world, but learning how to take, reasonable goals and to articulate reasonable goals that manifest those values. Those are two very different things. You can almost kind of look at values as, the a compass pointing north. You never actually get north. It's not a place. The North Pole, but is it? It's not a place. For example, a value of, well, here, being a good parent. It's not that anyone's going to give you a certificate one day and say, congratulations, Mrs. Schmidt. You are a good parent. It never happens. But by articulating that value, you'll never arrive at what you do by setting that goal, by setting that target, setting that value. As you go through life, you're able to pick goals that manifest that value of being a good parent. Getting up on time is a goal. It's concrete. You achieve it. You actually bring it into the world. Getting up on time in order that you have enough time to fix your kids their school lunch and get them out of the house so they make it to school without being late. That you achieve. That's being a good parent. Listening to your kids without interrupting when they're sharing their problems. When the kid just, this is more with teenagers. When dad, can you just listen? Being a good parent means no matter how painful it is that you see what the problem is and your kid just doesn't. And you just want to help them, but resisting that urge so they can talk it out themselves. That they can discover the experiences they're having that they can come to those decisions. They can come to those realizations. Well, that's being a good parent. Keeping your mouth quiet and being a good listener. It's a concrete action. So it just seemed to me like as a suggestion of what sort of targets are you trying to hit as a parent. Those seem to be pretty good ones. But come up with your own, what do you value in your lives? And everyone values different things. It's worth kind of asking, well, what's special about you and the family you come from? The things that you find meaningful. Well, first know your kid. Well, do they also have a shot of finding those things meaningful? Again, if your kid is not so open, well, being curious might not be a value that's appropriate for them. But assuming that you guys more are on the same page, well, what are those values that make life meaningful for you? And when you set those values, you kind of think, well, what are the goals in achieving those values? And you kind of use that to orient your parenting. But